Hey friends, I hope your week is off to a great start. Today we're going to be making Sohla's Cinnamon-Date Sticky Buns from the Basically Better Baking series. Earlier in the week I asked you all in a poll on my Communities tab what recipe you wanted to see next, and this is what you picked by an overwhelming margin. So that's exactly what we're doing today. Truthfully, this is a recipe that I've kind of been dreading making for a few different reasons. So first, this is one that kind of has to sit overnight. There's that, proof rise situation going on, which is always a little bit annoying for making a recipe, both for the channel as well as just in life. It feels like it sucks up your whole weekend. So it's Friday, I'm getting a jump start on it. The second reason I've been putting this off is that the recipe was developed for a food processor for both the dough and the filling. However, Sohla posted step-by-step instructions on her Instagram stories for how to make the dough without a food processor. Without any further ado though, let's get right into the recipes. First up, I've got my whole milk regular non-Greek yogurt along with 6 tablespoons of vegetable oil. So I'm going to mix these together and we'll go ahead and pop these in the microwave. So we're microwaving this in 3 10-second bursts. We're not looking to get this super hot. We're just taking the chill off it. All right, so Sohla said to bring this up to 98 degrees. 30 seconds in my microwave brought this up to, we're a little over 98. We're in the very low hundreds. However, the yeast likes to be between 100 and 110 degrees Fahrenheit. So I think we're okay here. I wanted to ensure that we weren't over 110. I didn't want to kill the yeast. Next, we're going to whisk together the dry ingredients. So here I've got AP flour, baking soda, and a little bit of kosher salt. And then the last bit we need to do is combine our dark brown sugar with 1 egg. Going to whisk this together. And then we've got our 1 envelope of active dry yeast. Now what's kind of interesting is that we're not proofing the yeast ahead of time. So when we made the no need focaccia, we added the yeast to, water and honey and let that proof for about 5 minutes just to make sure that it got nice and foamy. This recipe doesn't call for any sort of pre-proofing stage to make sure that the yeast is alive, so we'll just have to hope that everything is working. So we've got our 3 components ready. I'm going to add this yogurt oil mixture into the yeasty mixture, and we'll get this all whisked together to get it evenly incorporated. Okay, so after about 10 seconds, that's looking nice and homogeneous. And then all at once, we are going to dump this into our dry ingredients. So then using my spatula, you're just mixing everything together to get the flour incorporated into the wet ingredients. You want to mix this until there are no dry spots remaining. This is looking really, really dry right now. I'm actually going to go in with my hand for a second just to make sure that we're getting everything incorporated. Yeah, this is working better. The spatula did a good job, but there were just some bits down at the bottom that I didn't want to kind of be hanging out down there. And that I think is pretty good. So we've got kind of 1 lump of dough. All right, so this dough has come together in a mostly contained blob. It's definitely very scraggly and rough looking. However, we're gonna let this rest at room temperature covered for 15 minutes, then we're gonna come back and get it kneaded. Great, so this dough has been resting, so we can go ahead and start kneading this. You can see the texture here is very just smushy. It doesn't really spring back or anything. And we're gonna knead this for 3 minutes. And I have never kneaded dough before. The technique that Sohla showed was kind of pushing and pulling, and she was doing it in this kind of alternating direction like this. So the dough is quite sticky right now. Sohla advised against adding any additional flour though. If you add extra flour, there's not enough moisture in here to hydrate that flour, so you're gonna end up with, I guess, a tougher and drier sticky bun, so don't do that. It's not sticky enough to the point where I would add flour to it. I mean, it feels a little bit like maybe greasy to the surface or something, but it's not really sticky, sticking to my fingers the way that a cookie dough would or something like that. The focaccia bread was stickier than this, I think. So we are, what is this? About 2 minutes in, and the texture of this has definitely changed. So you can see it's not really skidding and smushing away from me anymore. The texture of this is getting really tight. It's feeling smoother in my hand though, it's more kind of evenly combined. I don't know if the texture is going to show up on camera, but this is quite smooth. It was really raggedy and rough looking before, and this is now definitely more of a smooth, uniform, homogeneous mass of dough. So that was 3 minutes in total. We're going to let this rest now. So I'm going to pop it back into its little bowl. We'll cover this, and it's going to rest for another 15 minutes. All right, so it's been 15 minutes, and we're ready to knead again. So get the lid off here, a little bit more heat coming off from that dough. You can see that it's springing back a little bit, so I think that is some gluten formation forming here. So I think that's a sign we're going in the right direction. And we're going to knead this for another 3 minutes. I will say, Going into this, I was not super excited. I felt like this was going to be really challenging to do. However, seeing the dough come together in that last round of kneading was actually surprisingly satisfying. The last 15 minutes, I've been kind of just sitting, I'm editing another video right now, and I was like, kept thinking back to how cool that was, just to see the texture change in the dough. To have such a noticeable difference after only 3 minutes of kneading, it's pretty like astounding how, like, what is this, like 5 ingredients that we're kneading together right now, and it's like transformational. It's so crazy. Cooking is wild. Cool. So now at this point, we're going to roll this out into an 8-inch approximately square. That seems kind of close. I'm just eyeballing it. And now we're going to fold this in half, and then we're going to fold it in half again. We're going to do that whole process one more time. So now in a new medium bowl, I've got some vegetable oil, and we're gonna let this dough proof for at least 8 hours or up to a day. So this is Friday after work for me, so I'm gonna let this just hang out overnight in the refrigerator. You want to have the dough fully coated in oil. So if you have any like dry spots, the dough's gonna get a skin on it, and so it won't be able to rise and expand while it's in the refrigerator. All right, so I've got this silicone bowl cover. You wanna have an airtight seal on this. So this is going into the refrigerator now. We're gonna let this hang out just overnight. Again, 8 hours minimum up to a day. So I'll see you guys tomorrow. All right, so it's the next day. The dough has been in the refrigerator for close to 20 hours at this point. So now we're gonna make the filling and get everything assembled. So here I've got some dates. These have been soaking in boiling water for 10 minutes at this point. I'm going to scoop these out and drop them into the jug of my blender. The recipe calls for doing this in a food processor, which I don't have. In my blender jug, I already have 1 tablespoon of oil as well. Next into the blender jug, I've got some ground cinnamon and kosher salt. And then we're gonna get to blending. So this is meant to be done in a food processor. So this is obviously gonna be a super thick mixture. It's a bunch of solid dates and just a tiny bit of oil. So I am expecting to have a little bit of difficulty here. If you have a food processor, this will likely go more smoothly. The recipe notes that this should take about 4 minutes in the food processor. So here I'm thinking maybe this is gonna be more like a 6-7 minute type of proposition for me. All right, so after a minute, we're actually making some good progress here. So the texture of this is definitely smoothing out. It looks very similar to like a peanut butter or like an apple butter. I can still see the fibrous bits. I'm gonna keep blending this until we're completely smooth. Perfect, yeah, I think this looks great. So this is the end result of what we ended up with. So it's super creamy. I don't see lumps of anything in here. There are some little speckly bits of like the skin fragments, but I really like the appearance of it. It seems completely smooth and homogeneous. All right, great. So we are all done with this puree. I'm just gonna set this aside and we can get on to assembling. All right, so the dough's been rising overnight. You can see that it's definitely more than doubled in volume. That's a great sign. So at this point, we're going to punch this down a little bit. It's so cold and firm. And we'll get this turned out. Just as a note, you do want to transfer this to an unfloured surface. So first up, we're going to roll this out to an 8x8 square. So we're repeating that process we did from yesterday, the folding process that is, about 8x8. So we're going in half. We're going to go in half again. Smush this down. And now we want to roll this out to a 12x12 square. So this one does need to be a little bit more precise in terms of being an actual square. So the dough is really fighting me on staying expanded out to 12 inches. It keeps contracting in. So the recipe says if you're having this happen, wait 5 minutes, let it relax a little bit, and try to work with it again. So I'm going to set a timer for 5 minutes, and we'll come back and try to roll this out one more time. All right, cool. So our dough has been resting for 5 more minutes. Let's see if it's a little bit more willing to work with us here. And I'm just using my hands a bit to pull the dough into more of a square shape rather than a rounded square. Perfect. So now we're going to spread our date puree all over the surface, edge to edge, except we're leaving a 1/2 inch border at the edge furthest away from us. We've got this spread edge to edge. We've got our little border here. Just as a note, we are going to be trimming these edges off once we roll it up. So if you're not perfectly to the edge on the left and the right, that's totally fine. Here I've got some more dark brown sugar, and we're just going to crumble this over the surface. Again, going for an even distribution and observing that 1/2 inch border at the side furthest from us. So now we are ready to roll this up. So starting at the side closest from you, you want to roll this into a tight log. And I have never made anything that required rolling before. Feels like if this were on parchment or something, it might have made it a bit easier. Oh, actually, you know what? This is rolling really easily. So I've got my 10-inch cast iron skillet here. I greased it with a tablespoon of vegetable oil. And now we're going to take off about a 1/2 inch on the edges here using a serrated knife. The recipe says to discard those, but I bet you could bake them up, and I'm actually going to try to bake them up into some little scraps for myself, or a Scooby snack, as Carla would say. And now we're dividing this log into 3. So, okay, and then cutting this one into thirds. You can see that my log was a little bit uneven. And one side is fatter than the other. And we want to evenly space these in here. We're going to have 9 total, so we're going to have 8 around the perimeter with the 1 in the center. Boy, these are going to be quite close together, actually. Awesome. So our buns are good to go. I'm going to pop a lid on this, and we're going to let this rise at room temperature in a slightly warmish place for an 1.5 to 2 hours. You're looking for these to about double in size, and spring back slowly when you press them. So our sticky buns have been sitting at room temperature for an 1.5 hours, and this is what they're looking like. So they have gotten super big, very fluffy, definitely doubled in size. All of the little gaps in the pan have closed in. They smell like so yeasty and delicious right now. And so these are ready to bake. So I've got my oven preheated up to 350 degrees, and we're gonna bake this with the lid on. So the recipe says if you have a domed lid, use that. I don't have a domed lid. So since I don't have a domed lid, I think I'm actually gonna use a pan, and I can just put this over the top as kind of a makeshift domed lid, and this will allow the buns to kind of rise up at least. So this is how I'm going to bake that. Obviously, if you do something like this, be very careful when removing, because this is going to be a bit precarious. So I will set this pan on the top once it's in the oven. And then lastly, I do have the little offcuts from when I evened up the rolls, and you can see that, you know, these have puffed up as well. So I'm going to set these in just a little muffin tin pan, and I will pop this into my toaster oven. So I'm going to bake these for probably just like 15 minutes. It seems like they're obviously much smaller than these, so these will cook up probably super fast. But let's go ahead and get baking. All right, so those are in for 20 minutes. After 20 minutes, we're going to take the lid off and let them cook another 15 to 25 minutes, depending whether you want it fluffier, which would be the 15, or more like toasty and crispy, which would be the 25. All right, so I just pulled the sticky buns out of the oven. They look incredible, and now we're ready to make the glaze that's gonna go on top. Here in a small bowl, I've got some powdered sugar. To that, I'm going to add vanilla extract. And the recipe calls for buttermilk again in the icing. So when we made the dough, the recipe specifically said, hey, you can sub this out with yogurt if you want to. So I'm gonna assume that that same substitution applies to the icing. If it doesn't, I've got a bit of water to help thin this down. We're basically making just like a standard confectionery glaze. So normally that's milk or water and powdered sugar. So the yogurt may make this a little bit too viscous, but we'll see how it goes. All right, and this should look quite dry at first. Typically, it takes a moment for the powdered sugar to saturate, and then it'll get to normal. So you can see I've got a weird blob there in the center. This is pretty typical. Awesome, wow. Well, I'm pleasantly surprised. I did not expect the yogurt to go into the powdered sugar quite so easily. This is great. And you really just need to whisk this until there are no lumps of powdered sugar remaining and it looks pretty smooth. So the longer you whisk, it's not gonna get lighter, fluffier, it's not gonna do anything, so you're purely getting that sugar dissolved. All right, and that looks fantastic. So we are ready to glaze these buns. I'm so happy with how these look. I think they look absolutely incredible. I never thought that I would make something that looked like this. I mean, it looks perfect minus, you know, the irregular sizes. But overall, I'm just really happy with this. So pretty exciting. Additionally, the little baby offcuts that we made, I mean, this one's super tiny, but it looks good. It's a little bit firm to the touch, probably overcooked. In total, I baked this for 20 minutes with the lid on, and then 18 minutes with the lid off. These baked for a total of about 20 minutes total, which was probably too long, just because they're so small. But I mean, even if they're not perfect, you can see it's still a little bit soft. Even if they're not perfect, I'd rather have something that's a little bit hard and chewy rather than waste food. So regardless, okay. So Sohla did say you want to let these cool slightly and then glaze them. So she said glazing while warm is important so that all the nooks and crannies kind of suck in the glaze. And this is a really generous amount of glaze. So, you know, don't be shy here. There's plenty to get all the way around the pan. You can go back for seconds if you see a spot that looks a little bit undersaturated. So you can be quite liberal in your application here. Well, for these guys too, they can get in on the excitement. These are all glazed up. I am gonna let that glaze sit for just about 5 minutes to let it firm up slightly. It's not gonna get fully hard. Confectionery glaze will always be a little bit kind of soft and pliable to the touch, but this is still scorching out because it's literally been out of the oven for only 5 minutes. So I'm gonna let this sit for another 5, and then we'll pop one of these out and give it a taste. So the glaze on the sticky buns has been setting up at room temperature for about 5 minutes at this point, and this is the finished product. So the top has a really nice glossy presence here. The crust on the back and the bottom is nice and golden brown. The sides here are really, really tender and pillowy. I am just dying to dig into this, so I'm just gonna go straight for it. Mmm. Wow. The inside here, oh my gosh. This is like the best cinnamon roll situation I think I've ever had. The amount of the filling in here is so plentiful. Like, it is a thick layer of that cinnamon date mixture, which is like the best part of any like cinnamon roll, sticky bun, whatever. The bread itself is lightly sweet. It's super chewy, like in a really, really good, like yeasty, yummy way. Wow. This is really good. Overall, really happy with the Cinnamon Date Sticky Buns. They are absolutely delicious. The process wasn't really difficult, surprisingly, even without a food processor. And the flavor, texture, appearance of this is just like absolutely impressive. So I'm delighted to have these. Absolutely recommend you give this a go if you can get the ingredients right now. Hope you enjoyed this week's video. If you did, please be sure to give me a big thumbs up and click subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next week.